Okay, today we're going to talk about the time period after the French and Indian War and before the American Revolution. This time period in American history was a time filled with great turmoil in the colonies and continual anger towards the King of England and the Parliament. Eventually it's going to lead us to want to fight the American Revolution. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the time directly after the French and Indian War. We, the colonists in England, had won the French and Indian War, and with that, we had gained the land to the west of the Appalachian Mountains and east of the Mississippi River. So we're talking present-day Mississippi, Alabama, on up to the Great Lakes area. This land was really good, really cheap, and a lot of colonists wanted to move west. So once the war was over and we gained that land, the colonists believed that they were going to be able to move west, and some of them did start moving west. And when they got there, the Native Americans were attacking them. They requested protection from the King of England, the Redcoats. As English citizens, they felt they had a right to protection. The king refused protection because he did not want to spend the funds to send Redcoats out west. In doing that, he created a law, the Proclamation of 1763, which says no movement past the Appalachians. So here this is the Atlantic, here's the 13 colonies, Appalachian Mountains. They could not move past the Appalachian Mountains. They were basically stuck in the original 13 colonies. This was in order for the king to save money on sending troops over for protection. Okay, the second thing is the Quartering Act, which required the colonists to quarter or house British redcoats. The colonists were forced to have the redcoats move into homes with them and provide for them. This was a way for the king to save money on paying for or providing for the redcoats. He said, I'm sending these redcoats, British soldiers, over to protect you. I cannot afford to also provide for them, so in exchange, I am forcing you to provide shelter and food for the redcoats. Of course, the colonists were very angry about this. Not only was it a financial burden, but it was an invasion of privacy and just a burden in general. Okay, the next one is the Sugar Act. It was a tax on sugar, molasses, and other products shipped to the colonies, and it was not a direct tax. A direct tax would be a tax within the colonies. This was a tax on goods coming into the colonies, so an imported good, I, import, E, export means going out. The colonists were angry about this tax because they relied on sugar and mainly molasses to create rum. Rum provided them with an excellent trade product in order to get slaves from Africa to the colonies, and we needed slaves for the southern colonies who continued to produce tobacco, indigo, and other products, later cotton. So the New England colonies profited from the slave trade. The South would go and purchase the slaves from New England, and then the southern colonies would profit through their agriculture. So the Sugar Act then affected that slave trade. Okay, the Stamp Act. All documents had to have a stamp showing a tax had been paid. This was a new tax within the colonies. It was a tax directly on the colonists. So it was a direct tax. You would go and purchase a newspaper or any type of legal document, and you would have to have stamps on each of the pages, which would then be additional money you paid on top of the product. Again, all of these acts are building up frustration in the colonies. Okay, the Townshend Acts were duties or import tax on glass, paper, paint, lead, and tea. Again, this was not a direct tax. Goods would come in and they would be taxed at the port of entry into the American colonies. The next is the Tea Act. It was a tax on tea and forced the colonists to buy tea from a British company called the East India Company. Tea was was an important part of the British the American colonists' life. They drank tea daily. They were from Britain. Tea is an element of their diet. So to have it taxed additionally upset the colonists and caused financial strain. Okay, now, it's important to remember that the king was issuing all of these taxes on the colonists because we had just fought the French and Indian War, and they had fought the 7 Years' War in Europe. And so they had a lot of debt, and they needed to be able to pay it off. And so the king thought, well, the best way to pay off the debt is to get money sent to me through taxes from the American colonies. The American colonists were upset about this because they did not have representation in Parliament, and they felt that the debt of England was being placed on the American colonists' shoulders unfairly. So the reactions. The first reaction were boycotts, which is a refusal to buy goods. Boycotts really helped a lot during this time period. Basically what they did, for example, let's use the Tea Act. They were told that they had to buy tea from the East India Company. By boycotting the East India Company and not purchasing tea from them, the East India Company then is hurt financially. The goal for this then is they hoped that by hurting the company financially, the company and the government would reconsider and say, okay, we're going to lessen or take away the tax so that you'll start purchasing from us again. And it did work to a degree until the king just started getting really upset with the continual boycotts. Number 2, the Sons of Liberty was formed. This was led by Samuel Adams. The Sons of Liberty were a group of men who, within the colonies, who wrote documents and spoke at town hall meetings and really tried to get the colonists revved up and angry with England. They're going to be very important in the American Revolution and helping the colonies gain support for the revolution. Number 3, tar and feathering and other violent acts. This, number 3, was something that a lot of people didn't agree with. Most of the colonists were upset about the taxes, but there was a large majority who agreed with boycotting but did not want it to turn violent. And tar and feathering is a very violent act. So is dragging people through the streets and beating them and all of those type of things that happen to the tax collectors. And so this one was a rather ugly reaction. Number 4, the Boston Massacre. Okay, the Boston Massacre, it obviously happened in Boston. When I say massacre, you automatically think, oh my goodness, there must have been a huge number of people dead or killed. In reality, there were 5 colonists who lost their lives that day, but we labeled it the Boston Massacre because we didn't have any other way to relate news or to give news to other people other than through newspapers and word of mouth. So if we titled it the Boston Massacre, it's going to cause uproar throughout the colonies because they're going to automatically think the redcoats are going around killing lots of colonists. What really happened that day was there were a group of redcoats in downtown Boston, and they were armed, and some colonists started throwing snowballs at the redcoats. It got out of hand. Kind of like a mob of colonists surrounded the redcoats. They were getting closer. It was turning violent. Allegedly, a redcoat shot his gun into the air, and then that's when the other redcoats thought that the colonists had shot at them, so they fired back, and it ended up being 5 were killed that day. But again, they used it as a propaganda tool, a way to make it bigger than it seems to gain negative attention towards the British. Number 5, the Boston Tea Party. This was led by the Sons of Liberty. It was a reaction to the Tea Act. The Sons of Liberty dressed up as Native Americans, sailed out into Boston Harbor, jumped onto a couple ships that had come in from Britain filled with tea chests, and they dumped over 300 chests of tea into Boston Harbor, destroying thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars of tea for England. And of course, England was furious after this and demanded that Boston pay for the damages. Okay. Last reaction we're going to talk about is the committees of correspondence. These were groups of colonists who exchanged letters on colonial affairs. Again, we didn't have the telephone, we didn't have the internet, we didn't have TV back then. So this group would write letters and send them to other colonies, and it was a way to keep up with what was going on in other colonies, who was boycotting what type of reactions did each colony have towards the acts, and just suggestions. Okay, in 1774, after all of these acts had been enacted, we're going to have the first Continental Congress meeting. And they're going to meet together, representatives from each colony, and they're going to talk about ways in which to react towards the British acts and laws. Obviously, all of the colonies were being negatively affected, and they wanted to kind of figure out a way maybe that they could have a unified front in reaction to the British. So they said, number one, we're going to ban all trade with Britain. So they practiced a colonial boycott where all the colonies were going to boycott products from Britain. Number two, they were going to begin training troops. Now, they hadn't formed an army yet, but they would just say, go back to your colonies and begin training your colonial militias. Number three, they were going to meet again in 7 months. However, 7 months was too long, because before the meeting was scheduled, we had the shot heard around the world, which is going to be the first battle in the American Revolution. And we'll talk about that at another time.